Hi, Grant.
Hi, Shireen. How are you doing?
I'm fine. We are super excited about today's webinar.
Me too. Me too. Looking forward to it.
Yes, 2024 is coming with lots of updates for supply chain.
Absolutely. It's never a dull moment in supply chain, that's for sure.
So we have some people say to you, hi, Grant. Hi, Shireen. Saad. Hi, Saad.
Assalamu alaikum, Saad.
Yes. So in order to prepare to start, would you kindly write to us in the comments where you are from, what you do, what's your company doing, what industry you are from? So this will help us in managing the webinar, meeting your expectation. So first question, yes, you can watch all past webinars. They are all recorded on our YouTube channel. And here is the link. So would you kindly write, like I would write, I'm Shireen, I work in as a supply chain analyst, maybe in a pharmaceutical company. I'm from Egypt. So just write where you are from, what you do, type of industry. So we have Dr. Ilsamani Malik from KSA, Dahran University, KFUPM. Welcome, doctor. You are one of the best people who attend our webinars all the time. You will receive special award sometime. So we have Amina Malik. Hi, Amina, working as educator in Delma School in UAE. She's from India. Welcome. We have Abdurrahman Sayed, still studying actually at Academy. It's ASTA, Arab Academy for Science and Technology. His major is supply chain, year 4 from Egypt. Wow, interesting. We have Mr. Adnan Ahmed from Pakistan. He teaches supply chain management. Interesting. We have Abdullah Al Ahmadi, electrical vehicle automotive engineer from KSA. Welcome, Abdullah. This guy, Abdullah, works in one of the most prestigious electrical vehicles in the world, Lucid. So we have Mazen Haider. Mazen Haider working chemical industry and working as supply chain head from Saudi Arabia. Interesting. Sarah Sakari from Egypt. She is working as group of hospitals in Egypt and KSA. Interesting. She's working in a group of hospitals. We have Ma'man Mustafa, supply chain manager pharma from Egypt. Hi, Ma'man. Okay. We have Samar Asfour from Cairo. She works as logistics specialist, pharmaceutical. Okay, accepting to be updated, willing to be updated. Okay, that's great. We have Mr. Abdu from Egypt, machine engineer. He loves to learn more about supply chain. Interesting. We have Mona Saleh. Mona, Deputy Procurement Manager at Pyramids Cosmetics, MPG Egypt. Okay, that's cool. So we have big group of people and they are increasing. So Grant, do you like to start?
Sure. Should I share my slides?
Yes. In the beginning, I would like just to welcome you. I am Shireen with you on the webinar. This is number 163 webinar, and we are so proud to have Grant Swanepoel with us today. And I have been working with Grant for years, so super excited to have Grant with us. Grant, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shireen, and it's been such a pleasure over the years to work with you and the Symbios team there as well. So my name is Grant. I work for ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. What we do at ASCM is we really support the industry with industry best practice, with training, learning and development, the body of knowledge for supply chain management. And many of you would be familiar with the APEX name, but APEX and ASCM are really the same organization. My history is really focused on more planning, I'd say, supply chain planning, S&OP, demand and supply planning, and those kinds of areas, but also involved in many different supply chain projects, and seeing the good and the bad from a supply chain perspective over the years. And obviously supply chain is an amazing area to be in. So I studied supply chain management right from the beginning, straight out of high school, and I have not done anything else since then. So it's been really amazing to be part of this industry and this community as well. So if you don't mind, Shireen, let me share my slides quickly, and let's jump into the content for today. So thank you so much, everyone, for putting in your industries into the chat, because I'm going to be using them a bit later as well for this discussion. So really what we're going to be discussing today is about how we consider operating models in the supply chain. So you might ask, what is an operating model? And we're going to dive into that so that we can get a better sense of what the definition is and what we mean when we say operating model, and how that can help us in a supply chain to be more efficient and to just have a more optimized supply chain as well. So the topics we'll be covering in today's session are going to be looking at defining operating model, what it means, and why it's relevant when we talk about supply chain optimization. Secondly, we'll look at determining, first of all, what the customer wants and how we compete. Many people say to me, when we say how we compete, it's not applicable to all industries, right? So if you're in the healthcare industry or a government healthcare supply chain, for example, which I think a few people in the audience are, you don't necessarily have competitors per se, but you're still competing in the sense that you're looking at what the customer wants and trying to get them what they want in the most efficient way. So there's always going to be the overlay of the operating model. And really the intent of this is to say that it's applicable whether you are competing against many competitors in your industry, or you have the monopoly in your industry and you're just trying to do the best that you can for a certain objective. So this is what we're going to be looking at in section 2. Then in section 3, we'll discuss the operating model decisions. So what do we mean when we say making a decision around the operating model? Should we have one supplier or should we have 20 suppliers? Those are kind of things that are operating model decisions that we want to dive into. But we need to understand why and on what basis are we making these decisions. So we'll be looking at this from the perspective of the network, the technology we use, risk management, and sustainability, which always comes in there all the time as well, actually. I actually did a webinar with one of our partners based in Ireland last night, and we spoke all about sustainability, right? So it was a very interesting topic. And then the fourth section that we'll be going through is measuring and quantifying supply chain performance, and also a discussion that I'd like to have a bit more focus on is scenarios and scenario planning. So scenarios is looking at the future and what could be the outcome of decisions that we make in the supply chain. We don't see many organizations fully taking advantage of scenario planning, but I think it's a very powerful tool to enable them to make better decisions and to understand the impacts of the decisions that they make. So let's dive into it. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. Let's just see if I can see the chat. Yep, I can see the chat as well. Perfect. Thanks, Iman. I see you if you have noticed that already. So let's define the operating model. So first of all, when we talk about the word operating model, what we're really referring to is how the supply chain structures their operations, how we design things in the supply chain, and then implement and manage the execution thereof. So anything we do in a supply chain is, nothing just happens by itself, right? If I go to a retailer now and I look at the shelves and I see, oh, look, they've got some oranges, they've got some apples, they've got some bananas on the shelf. Someone decided how much to put there, when to put it there, how much it costs, and what the impact of that would be, right? Would be sell it, and what would be the profitability of each of those elements. In supply chains, it's usually the case that we're making active decisions, right? In some cases, we are not as mature when we look at, for example, a customer places an order, and in some organizations that are less mature, they have less structured processes that do not optimally allow for the repetition of these kind of processes. We'll dive into maturity levels in a bit as well, because I think that's something that's really important for us to think about when we talk about operating model. But really the other part of the supply chain operating model, and from a definition perspective, is thinking about the relationships that are involved with each and every area of the supply chain. The internal relationships, and let's call it the handoffs between different areas of the supply chain, how we do those, the procurement and let's say the sales side as from a customer perspective, as well as the procurement side from a supplier perspective, right? So how do we interact with these entities that surround the organization as well? The supply chain operating model outlines how different functions within that supply chain operate, like procurement, manufacturing, logistics, distribution, etc., how all these things are organized and how they are integrated. We also want to make certain decisions about where to put our resources, where to put the people, where to put the time, where to put the effort, where to put the money. What area of the supply chain should we be investing in, for example, right? And all of these decisions are really coming from the starting point, which is, what is the strategy of the organization? You can think of supply chain operating models as really operationalizing the strategy of the organization into the supply chain and into the different functional areas as well. So some key elements of the operating model would include the following: our approach to sourcing materials, production planning, for example, what we do in terms of how much we make and when we make it, inventory management from an inventory management policy perspective, distribution networks, where are the suppliers, where are the customers, a little bit less of your choice in terms of where the customers are, but you make a choice around which customers to go for and which channels to use, and then the relationships with suppliers and customers as we had mentioned. The final goal here is really to align supply chain activities with that business strategy, as I had mentioned. All right, so this is what operating model means. Then let's look at this over here, which is a qualitative view of supply chain maturity. And I know everyone at Symbios-Consulting has actually seen this and that we're very familiar with this, this assessment, because there is an assessment that is actually applicable to this as well. So when we look at this, we're really talking about the different levels of maturity of a supply chain segment, right? One important topic that I really am very, very strong about is that a supply chain or a business does not just have one supply chain. We have many supply chains. And those different supply chains operate in different levels of maturity sometimes. So even within the same company, you might find different levels across different functional areas or different product groupings, geographies of that company, and that might have a different impact on the maturity levels of that supply chain. So I'll just go through them really quickly so we can get a sense of what these mean. But one or two key notes that I pull out of this, if we look at, for example, a reactive supply chain to start off with, a reactive supply chain really has internal activities only that tend to be undertaken in a very ad hoc way. So we're not doing much planning, we're not really doing forecasting. We get an order and then we figure out how to supply the order, right? There's not really much in the way of inventory policies and decisions around how much we should keep and where we should keep it, right? Very basic. We're waiting for an order, it comes in, and then we just do something to support that, right? So that would be at a very low level of maturity. Then let's go up to level two. Level two, the reactive efficient supply chain. The organization here has a little bit more orchestration going on internally, but they don't have really many outside links. So for example, you have the ordering department or the warehouse. The warehouse might receive orders and they ship the orders out. There are some processes in place that they might use, but those processes are not going to be really very much linked to other parts of the organization, right? So less in the way of forward planning and forward decision making, definitely not scenario planning, and things like that, right? They might also be using some technology, but it may not be fully utilized, or it may be used in a very rudimentary way, right? For example, people just using it as a database, in essence, and not really letting it make decisions. So those are some of what defines a level two supply chain. Then we get into an integrated enterprise supply chain, which is at level three. This organization is really fairly orchestrated. There are some formal links between this supply chain and the external world, like the customers and the suppliers, beyond just the ordering processes that exist, right? They might think about, okay, customer, what do you think the forecast is going to be in 4 months' time or 5 months' time? There is some of that happening, but it's at a slightly more informal level than we'd want it to be. However, things are working, right? It's semi-integrated. The supply chain is doing some kind of planning. They do look and use an ERP system of some kind or some sort of systems that talk to each other. And we do see that that is semi-working, right? I think a lot of entities are actually in this phase. Then we have the extended supply chain. And the key characteristics that define this are really when we think about the organization being able to link and integrate its network with the external parties, right? Thinking of key processes and things like collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, right? This could be an example of where you're starting to get into an extended enterprise supply chain, or vendor managed inventory, which is a concept where the vendor is actually responsible for supplying the inventory and makes decisions on behalf of the company based on a certain set of rules. So that's where we're starting to see these kind of things happen. Also a lot more proactive in the way of when we think of governance, when we think of the way they're managing risk, and of course the compliance piece as well. Forward in terms of the regulatory challenges and changes that might be happening, and really are building that into the supply chain from a risk management or mitigation perspective. So this is what we see at the level 4 of the maturity scale. And then we get to the very best of the best, the orchestrated supply chain. These organizations have very high levels of integration. Really, you can almost think of the supply chain as a not one company, but virtually like one company, right? You're competing more on the supply chain level than on the company level. So when we think of this from a tier 1, tier 2 supplier all the way to first tier and second tier customers, actually those things are operating in a lot of harmony, right? There's a lot of visibility, there's a lot of interaction, and there's a lot of trust within those supply chains. And on the concept of trust, that's why we do see organizations struggling to move from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 because of that trust, right? As soon as we get to those levels, we see that more information is communicated and shared between supply chain partners. And this is where you see that struggle sometimes come in with organizations too. So quickly, if you think about this, and everyone in the audience there, we had chemical, pharma, we had someone in a hospital environment, we had automotive, cosmetics. If you were to look at this list and just think in your mind, where would you be on this list in terms of your level of maturity currently, right? So just an interesting way to start this off and think about, let's baseline the maturity level that we think we're at, and then we can go ahead from there. One last comment on this is that it's very difficult. I haven't seen it happen in real life, but for a company to skip a level, right? If they're at level 2, it's almost 100% guaranteed that there's going to be level 3 and then level 4 and then level 5, right? It's like being a baby, then being a toddler, then being a teenager, then being a young adult. You can't skip that level, right? So we see that that's typically the process that happens when organizations are becoming more mature. Okay, great. So what are the steps to develop an operating model? So the very first thing that we want to have a look at is defining the strategic vision of the organization, and then in the different segments. So I mentioned to you that we have supply chains and not just one supply chain. We could be segmenting it by geography. We could be segmenting it by product type. We could be segmenting it by the structural need of the supply chain, right? Like some supply chains need cold storage and some do not, right? So this is an example of how you could strategically define the number of supply chains within your organization. And we'll take a little bit of a step into this in a moment as well. But this is really the starting point. The next step is to then make operating decisions, right? So I just want to be clear with that. The first point is about deciding the strategic vision. Then we can only make the operating decisions, which can help us achieve that decision. And I have a number of items here, and these all relate to the operating decision themselves. So the first part here is really thinking about building the functional skills within the organization. Looking at emphasizing functional excellence at the different levels of the organization to really maximize synergies that we have. Also to consolidate the planning function in a way, to think about how we create, let's say, knowledge excellence centers, right? So thinking about how we coordinate these things. Also creating points of accountability and ensuring that individuals use the latest tools and best practices within their organizations. The other thing to consider with operating models is how we allocate resources across markets. So if we had defined the supply chain as 4 different markets that we sell into, this is how we would then make these decisions and say, okay, we need to optimize where we spend our money, where we put assets, where we put inventory, even people, right? Where we put our best people, or where we and how we hire for those areas and what skills we need there. So this is really, when we think about global supply chains, really applicable, where we want to run a global sales and operations planning activity as well, to make sure that even though we have these different operating models happening in different areas, we can consolidate and decide on decisions at a total capacity level, right? So this, in my mind, is usually a much better option to have that full view. Some organizations, I've seen this before, split into regional areas, and those regional areas are almost semi-independent, making independent decisions about inventory and ordering and things like that. But it really does help to have that thread that is covered throughout all the regions and all the parts of the organization. So that leads us on to talking about integrating our end-to-end supply chain. So now thinking about the different components, the suppliers, the customers, and how we make linkages between these different supply chain players. So this is something to consider as well with operating model decision. And then recognizing regional differences, and then business differences as well. So it's really about differentiating what we do as an organization. Part of being able to differentiate what we do helps us to be more efficient, right? So I'll give you an example. And I was a demand planner for many years. So when we're doing planning, let's say we have many different types of products. We have some really expensive items, we have some really cheap items, we have items that can be very quickly received from the supplier and go to the customer. We have items that we take a long lead time, we have a make-to-stock item, make-to-order items, etc. And these could be all different. So do we apply the same forecasting methodology to all of those things? And the answer is 99% we shouldn't, because they have different characteristics and different needs. We don't need to have customer involvement in a very stable product, right? We need to have customer involvement where we have a very unique product that is going to be customized for that customer. So we want to make active and differentiated decisions. So what we would do is, let's say we select all our products, and now we can say these products are going to be customer-led forecasts. These products, we're going to use a forecasting methodology, or we're going to use a system to do the forecast for us. That's an example of how we should adapt some kind of difference to the operating model between different areas, applicable to their specific need. We're wasting our resources if we're applying a blanket approach. And also, we're probably not providing enough focus in certain areas if we're providing the average blanket approach across everything. Another perfect example of that is inventory, right? I've seen many organizations as well, the inventory standard is we keep 60 days worth of inventory, but you have 30,000 SKUs. That should be differentiated for sure, and also differentiated even where possible to the regional level as well. So that really helps to make the best decisions and optimize that overall supply chain as well. This is just a diagram showing you the kind of step 1 and step 2 of when we think of operating model and how we get there. So what you see over here is really how we would, an example, right? How we would group certain characteristics within the segments of the supply chain. So characteristics like the complexity of the product. How variable is the demand of that product? Where in the product life cycle is that product, right? So these could be some questions that we might want to ask. And let's say we have many different products. We could now put them into buckets and say, okay, we have a lot of products here that are very high complexity, but then we have some that are not very high in complexity. So we could put them in all in buckets, right? So just imagine us having all these buckets sitting around, and we can now start to put them into the right places. what we're really going to get out of that is different groups. So, we'll see that we have a low product complexity, high demand variability, and at the end of the product life cycle. What do we do with those products, right? We can put them into a segment of their own. And once we've created these segments, we can now start to talk about how we operate those supply chains and how we operate them from the different aspects within the supply chain. So within planning, sourcing, making, delivering, and we'll talk about the new score model in a moment as well, because these are from score version 12. But do we do a statistical versus a customer input forecast? Are we looking at single versus multiple sources of supply? When we manufacture, is it insourcing or outsourcing that we're looking at doing? And of course, delivery is into a single country, or is it a multi-country strategy potentially for delivery as well, and where we store product? So these are all decisions that we can actively make by product and by segment. And that's what we will do with the operating model itself. So let's talk a little bit about what the customer wants and also how we compete as a company. So who's seen this kind of segmentation table before? Anyone? Put your hand up if you've seen it before. Okay, I see there is some people. Fantastic. All right. Great. It'll be great to know, and we can talk about this later, but if you've used it in your organization as well, right? Thinking about the business segment. So this could be looking at, for example, the products, the product groupings, the family of the product, and we call this the supply view. And then we have the demand view, which is looking typically at the customer or the market channels. So the retail channel, the wholesale channel, and the e-commerce channel. These could be looked at as different channels of the demand view side of it. So that's something that many organizations use to determine what their segments are going to be in the supply chain. So this matrix, you can look at it from a global, regional, country-specific perspective. As I mentioned, the columns are defined by the customer groups, the markets, the channels, and anything that generates revenue. The rows are defined by the products, the product groups, or the business lines that generate some kind of cost in the organization. And then priority supply chains can be identified using these criteria. So what you would typically do is say, okay, let's list everything here and list everything here, and then make a little cross where they intersect. Because in some cases, you don't sell all of your products to all of your customers. Sometimes it's more differentiated. So for that reason, you might make a little cross here and a little cross there, but maybe you don't do this for everything, right? So this is where we would see these intersections. A nice rule of thumb to know if you've covered everything is, does the revenue that you've allocated in all these crosses or X's, does that revenue equal the total revenue of the company, right? So if you look at the annual revenue for the organization, that should equal that total revenue that you achieve as an organization. So this is a starting point to segmenting the supply chain. Okay. So think about this in your own context and how you would segment your supply chain. Then I want to talk a little bit about the operating model canvas, okay, and also another concept, which is about looking at the competitive landscape. But let's talk a little bit about this. So this is a really nice tool that you can use to define the internal workings of the organization. So let's look at first from the desirability phase, okay? So what is the value proposition of the organization or of the segment that we've now defined? And these are examples, right? So for example, this one says high quality of purchased raw materials and labeling. Our private label owners can see our products as theirs, and then we have reliable distribution. That's the value proposition that we're offering here. Our customer relationships, we talk about them in terms of consignment, and we have sales representatives, and we have a website where they can purchase products from. Our channels are either through distributor or bulk sales. And then our customer segments are distributors, retailers, and bulk sales as well. So this is an example of one organization. From a desirability perspective, this is the customer side. What is it that the customer wants, and how are we defining that internally within the organization? This is called feasibility, this side, and this is really about how we support those activities. So who are the key partners or suppliers, right? In this case, we have oil products and lubricants, we have chemical products, we have plastic containers and corrugated, cardboard as part of the supplier side. Key activities that we do is quality control, bulk purchasing, packaging, and custom labeling. And then from a key resources perspective, we have raw material storage, distribution fleet, and ERP, right? The distribution fleet would be the vehicles that we have, and of course, the system that we're using to support that. Then let's look at the bottom over here, and we talk about value here. So the value is here looking at cost structure. So what is the cost related to all of the items in the feasibility side? And then from a revenue perspective, we look at this in terms of the sales to the customer. And of course, the value add that is created through that, right? So this is really what we would be considered here. This is what's called a business model operating canvas. It's a view of a business on a page, right? At a very summarized level. But it's really nice to have this if we were to look at all the different segments within the supply chain. And then moving on to the right-hand side here, this I'm terming here competitive landscape, although you might know these as the score attributes. And what we have here is when we think of the different attributes, it's about resilience in the supply chain, the economic component of that, so the numbers, the money, and then the sustainability aspect of that as well. And what's important to discuss here is what is important, what is it that your customers are offering? So if we look at this diagram over here, look at the business model operating canvas, compare that to what your customers are offering and how your customers are competing. So do you have customers, and I mean competitors, my apologies, I think I said customers. How are your competitors operating? What are your customers purchasing and why are they purchasing it, right? Are they buying it from your competitor because it's cheaper? Or are they buying it because it's more available when they need it? Or are they buying it because you are out of stock and they could quickly get the item in stock? So these are very important questions, and usually these come from a marketing department perspective. But in a supply chain, we know that this is important for the decisions that we want to make as well. So the competitive landscape will tell us on what basis do the customers purchase from different competitors, and what are the benefits of each of them? We 100% know this as supply chain professionals that cost is not everything, right? It's not just about having the lowest cost. It's also about all of these other things in many cases. Reliability becomes a very important one in most cases too, by the way, but it's usually a combination of any one of these. The second thing then is to look at the customer requirements. So we have what's called order qualifiers and then order winners. So an order qualifier is, as an organization, we have a minimum expectation from our customer, right? So let's say it's a price threshold, right? They will not spend more they will not spend more than 500 Egyptian pounds for that item, right? That's sort of a breaking point. They will say, well, it's not worth more than that. We will not spend more than that. That could be an order qualifier. The minimum level of quality, the minimum level of cost, what is that base level that we cannot go beyond? Customers are also becoming more, let's call them more, I don't want to use the word needy, but definitely more discerning. And with more choice comes more expectations of the organization as well. So in the past,
we can say more demanding. We can say more demanding.
Absolutely, Shireen. Perfect point there. So definitely they are. And this is really changing the way that they are seeing the minimum requirements, right? In the e-commerce world, this is a good example of that, where maybe it was okay a few years ago for you to have four-week delivery cycle, right? Now we're seeing e-commerce being within the same day in some cases. So you buy it online, you get it almost in the same day. And that becomes the new minimum. So all of a sudden, everyone has to achieve that minimum to remain competitive. So it does make life more difficult for the organization, but also it really adds more value to the customer based on what their demands are. Then we have what's called order winners. So order winners is really the minimum requirement in some areas, but also exceeding the competition in others. So let's say in the e-commerce example, I can deliver within 1 day, but I can do it also at the lowest cost. Or I can give you this, maybe it's not at the lowest cost, but I can give you a really high quality product, and that high quality product is available everywhere. beyond the competitors. So this is really what sets the organization apart. But the order winner is really where the customer ultimately goes, because they see more value within the right attributes for them to make that decision. So this is really looking at this from an internal perspective and then comparing it to what the customer wants. Okay. Even in the case where you don't have competitors, let's say, when you are operating within a public health supply chain, for example, there are still areas here that are absolute minimums that are required by the customer, right? So we can look at this and we think about the social aspect of that as well. We need to have life-saving medication at the hospital when it's needed, right? There is no choice on that. That's the qualifier. The winner would be having it there, not having to do as much administration to get it out, or having it there and having it be more effective or higher quality, right? Those are kind of things that can really help to support that order winning forward. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about that, and if we jump into a little bit more detail, there is an important decision that the organization needs to make, even before deciding on the operating model, is how are we competing, and what is most important to us and our customers. So straight from the SCORE model, many of you know this model very well. But really looking at this from a bottom line perspective, we have the people, profit, planet perspective over here. And then we have these themes of resilience, economic, and sustainability. The attributes that I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to define them and understand what we're trying to achieve. And then, of course, we also have metrics that are related to each of these attributes. So it's actually pointless saying, if you're an organization saying, hey, our most important attribute is being responsive. If we say that that's our most important attribute, then we have to measure that attribute, because that's going to tell us, are we doing a good or bad job of that? So that's really an important step, right? But what are we trying to achieve? So let's look at this one by one. First of all, reliability, right? Reliability's definition is the ability to perform a task as required or as expected. This focuses on being predictable. So let's say, for example, we have a customer that places an order. Our order lead time is 5 days. They can be sure that we will deliver that within 5 days, right? Hopefully not after, but also potentially not before either, because they're making some plans based on that coming in on the 5th day. So that's really the definition around reliability. And we'll talk about the different industries, because I like that everybody mentioned their industries early on, but where reliability usually is very important is in healthcare and in pharma. In fact, you'd sometimes see that reliability is more important than cost, right? They're willing to spend more money, but make sure that the product is available when it's needed, right? So that's definitely something that we see quite often within reliability, and this metric being important for that industry. The second one is responsiveness. So responsiveness is really about how quickly we can get the product to the customer, right? Does it take us 3 days? Does it take us 7 days? Does it take us 3 weeks? And this would be related to, if the customer sees importance in getting that product immediately, then it's more important to be more responsive. An industry that needs to be responsive, probably I would say the high-tech industry, to an extent the pharmaceutical industry as well, especially when we think of life-saving kind of products. If we think of vaccines, the COVID pandemic, right? We definitely saw responsiveness actually being a very important metric. Speed to market, right? How quickly we can do it. The next one is agility, being agile. So this is how we quickly adapt and change to changes in the competitive environment. And I wouldn't say cosmetics as much in here, but definitely the fashion industry. So there's changes in the designs and the styles. You know, a celebrity goes onto Twitter and they have a new outfit on, you know, and everybody wants that. There has to be a very quick turnaround from the organization to try and adapt and meet that change or that need in the market. So that's where agility would come into play. And then we have cost. So the cost to manage and operate the supply chain. If you think of a commodity type item, right? Think of like bread and milk and those kinds of commodities that you would buy from a supermarket. Very often cost is a big factor there, right? Especially lower income levels, the basic food products and things like that, cost would actually be a very important metric. And they might even have not as good a quality product. It might not be as nutritious. It might not be as good for the environment, but it's really cheap. That's something that some supply chains compete on as well. And you will see how we have two metrics at level 1, the total supply chain management cost, which is how much it costs us to do planning, to do manufacturing, to keep inventory and those sort of things within the supply chain, versus cost of goods, which is much more frequently measured, right? But the cost of actually purchasing the products, whether that be in raw materials or in finished goods phase. I think there's a question. Let me check the questions really quickly. So I see a question from Summit. I have a question related to IBP, Integrated Business Planning. How can I contribute as a business supply chain specialist in IBP related solutions? I think let's leave it for the end, Summit, and I'll get to your question later on. And then just to make sure that it's relevant for this discussion. And then what is the difference between agility and supply chain resilience? Okay. I love the question, Ihab. So it really is very similarly related, right? Being resilient means that we as an organization can weather the storm of an unexpected event, or we're better at taking actions when we have a risk that's occurred, right, in the supply chain. Let's say it's a fire at the warehouse or one of our suppliers, or something happens from a geopolitical perspective and prevents us from sending our products somewhere. Resilience is about how quickly we can respond to that and how much of an impact that has on the supply chain. Being agile means we can respond quickly to those changes in the market. So agility is very much tied into resilience, right? But also responsiveness and reliability are aspects of that, because they're supporting us getting the customer what they want when they want it. The true definition within agility is an unanticipated increase or decrease in demand. We didn't anticipate or expect it to happen, but we were able to solve the problem by being more agile. And an operating model can help us to do that. Let's put this right on the table now, right? How could we be more agile? Let's say we had one supplier and that was the only supplier we could go to get the product. What if we had 6 suppliers, or a supplier in every country supplying that same product? Now, all of a sudden, it's much easier for us to respond because we have more options to go to. So that's a good example of how you could become more agile and therefore be more resilient as a supply chain as well. And Summit, I'll get to your question later on, if that's okay with you. Then let's look at the next few steps here. So really quickly, profit. I mean, this one is self-explanatory, but being profitable as an organization, of course, and asset management as well. So this is effectively managing our assets for the purpose of being able to fulfill the need of the organization. We also want to maximize the output. So let's say it's a machine or it's a factory. We want to maximize the output for that. And this would be related to how well we use our assets. The other part that sits within assets is inventory. So about really getting the best and the most out of the inventory. An example of an organization that would see some importance when we talk about this from an inventory perspective is where we have a very short shelf life of a product, right? Then you really want to be able to manage that very effectively. Then you're thinking about how quickly we produce and how quickly we send out that product and sell it, right? There's those kind of factors that would be very applicable to an organization with producing a product that has a very short shelf life. That would be something we'd want to consider over here. And then, of course, we can't forget about environmental and social, right? So from an environmental perspective, it's really about reducing the impact on the environment. And then from a social perspective, about reducing the negative consequence of our business activities on people and communities, or actually uplifting them from a humanitarian perspective. I've actually been involved in a project a couple of years ago where we worked with the United Nations. And we worked with them on assessing their sustainability within the one component of the United Nations. So it's actually the Somali mission. And within that, I would want to say part of their competitive advantage in terms of how they compete is related to social, because it's all about getting or supporting people within the country who are affected by a war. But also they're looking at reliability because they want to be reliable to have the product there when it's available, right? Things like food and medical supplies and stuff like that. But definitely social was a big aspect for them when they think of how would they define what they were trying to achieve in their supply chain, okay? So this is just an example really quickly. So if you were a pharma company, this is possibly what you could look at doing. Maybe reliability is your key attribute here. So you've said this is a superior attribute. And then asset management is at a priority 2. You want this to be an advantage level, but you also want the cost to be an advantage level as well. And when we say superior advantage and also parity, we're actually talking about the comparison to a benchmark of some kind, right? So what would the superior organization be at reliability? Are they at 99% or 98%? And if we were to be at superior level, we should be at 98% or above, right? This is how we would define those examples from a decision perspective. Okay. So let's dive into then the operating model decisions for each of these different areas. So again, I'm showing you this attribute view. Okay, I kind of like it, as you know. So I want to take this to one at a time. So let's look at this from a score perspective and then think about what decisions would need to be made. So when we think of planning in the supply chain, forecasting, S&OP, demand planning, supply planning, what are decisions that we'd want to make to align to the attribute that we've chosen? Let's look at a few examples, right? And we've included orchestrate here as well, by the way. So first of all is the inventory policy. So what is the inventory policy for an organization who values cost as a key attribute versus an organization that values reliability? Supply chains are about trade-offs. So often we see the trade-off between cost and reliability. Yes, you can be more reliable, but at what cost? However, we should be balancing those things out as much as possible as well. So deciding on the inventory policy is really a key decision, which is going to be different whether you're focused on reliability or whether you're focused on cost. Maybe you can sacrifice a little bit of reliability, but significantly reduce the cost of holding your inventory, right? So that's a part of the decision that will be made through a scenario plan or scenario. So that is one way that we can make a decision on inventory. How many days cover do I need to keep in the warehouse and where, based on these attributes or whichever one I've chosen? Secondly, I have here the customer involvement in forecasting. So to what degree is the customer involved? Are we going and having a meeting with them every month for every customer because we need their input into the forecast and saying, okay, this is a very unique product. Hi, customer, what do you think the forecast is going to be? How many do you think we're going to sell? What do you think the demand is going to look like? Versus us internally saying, well, we know this is a very stable product. We have a 95% forecast accuracy every month for the last 4 years. We know it's a stable product. It's a very common product. So let's talk about then maybe just putting in a forecast that is system driven, right? System driven with maybe some checks in place. Maybe we don't need to have customer involvement, because when we have customer involvement, we need a process for that. We need a way that we can capture the information that comes through the customer, and also really how we distribute and disseminate that information and incorporate it into our forecasts, right? So it is a resource intensive thing to do. Maybe you need another demand planner to hire someone new if we decide that we need to have stronger customer involvement, right, into producing a forecast. The other thing is the forecasting technique, right? So what kind of forecasting technique do we use? A decision on, do we use some advanced artificial intelligence forecasting, or do we just do a simple linear regression, right? What is good enough to use, as well as what systems or technology can we use to support that function? The other thing that's also kind of important here is thinking about the HR structure or the organogram within the organization. This falls within orchestrate, by the way. If we had an organization that needed to be very agile, right, versus let's say, a more reliable organization, you might want to have a different structure. Maybe you want to have more ability to hire when you need, or to get contract labor in, right? For certain times when you have a big spike in demand, maybe you want to have the ability to do that. So that would be kind of related to the structure that we could consider over here. And the last one here, just as a note, is the risk appetite, right? So in terms of at what level of risk are we willing to accept? And this is going to come from, of course, our attributes over here, right? If we want to be highly agile, usually that means that we have less of a risk appetite, right? Cost might have slightly more of a risk built into it, possibly, right? But these are decisions that you'd want to make here too. Let's move on to the next one. So ordering system type. Okay, so what kind of ordering system do we have? Does a customer go onto the website and they order from us? Is it an email that they send? Do they pick up the phone and order like that? These are decisions that need to be made with this in mind. What is most cost effective? How can we be most agile on our orders, right? So let's say you want to be really agile with orders, right? You give them a WhatsApp number that they can send and they can place the order immediately and it's, almost instant. Or do you want them to go through a system that has a check and a balance and things like that, and then within 2 business days we get back to them, right? That depends on the attribute that we've chosen initially. Then the automation level of the ordering process. So is it repeat orders that are automatically applied? Is it one order at a time? What is that decision that we make there? And the channels as well. So the channels of how we actually deliver the product out and which ordering type we use for each of those. So B2B, B2C, if we think about the different channels, the warehouse, let's say the wholesale channel, for example, these could be different ordering decisions that we would want to make. And then sourcing. So this leads back to the question I had earlier about the number of suppliers. If we want to be more agile, a very easy way to do that is just put a supplier everywhere, have more suppliers. But of course, that's going to come at a cost. But this is a key decision that we need to make as an organization. The next is supplier location. So where do we put the suppliers, right? This is also depending on the segmentation that we would have already done. Because once we've done that segmentation, we can see what the need is for all the different geographic regions. So where would make most sense to have a supplier? And then the level of supplier engagement as well. So to what degree do we work with the suppliers in order to get the products out? If, for example, we're in a very unstable environment, there might be a need for us to engage more with those suppliers more often. Maybe we need a mechanism where they can provide feedback to us in terms of them not being able to supply something on time, looking at a forecast, maybe there's an issue on their side or a perceived or expected forecast issue. This is something that you'd want to think about as well. But it's about building the policy and building the process into place that you can have that level of supply engagement that you desire. Transform, this is what we refer to as, it's really the new make, right? Manufacturing component of the organization. So a key decision here could be machinery and technology investment. So to what degree do we invest in machines and technologies, in our factory, in a warehouse? How do we automate the warehouse? Is this a consideration for us? And all these things are going to be applicable to the initial list of attributes that we had said were important to us. The other one is fulfill and return. So fulfilling the product to the customer, as well as the return aspect of that. One that really goes between these two, transform and fulfill, is insourcing versus outsourcing. The decision whether we should make it ourselves or whether we should get somebody outside to do it for us and then purchase it from them. This is a very important decision that's related to the attribute that we choose. The one component of the return side that I'll just touch on really quickly is returns level of infrastructure investment over here. And if you think about the environmental piece as being very important, this might be a good rationale for an organization to decide to do a better job of return, because maybe they have some kind of waste product or end of life product that they need to take back at the end of the useful life of the product, and they will take that back and they have to get a system in place to do that, right? So no longer is the returns process ad hoc, but it's actually built into the supply chain itself. If we say environmental considerations are important to us, that's something that we may need to consider doing. And then a level of product quality over here. So how to what level of product quality are we targeting? I always think of Toyota as a really good example of this, right? And it's a great case study where quality in the long run they believe is really going to cost them less. So their level of quality is very high, and Toyota lasts for a long time, right? But they've made a conscious decision around the economics of having a high level of quality. For one of the reasons could be less returns, right? Less issues with vehicles, which means people don't come back as much. There's not so many spare parts that are needed and those kinds of things, right? So that's a conscious decision that was made. There could be the case in some industries and some products where they've made a decision that it's not going to last that long, right? That could be something that is actively decided upon. So these are all decisions that need to be made, right? Any questions on operating model decisions over here? Okay, so I see there's another question. Yeah, thank you for that. So could we include the recycled material into the profit? Absolutely. So for sure, that's definitely a way to say, well, we're reusing the recycled material, and I think of it like it's a new raw material. So if we're using that material in place of a raw material that we would have purchased new, that means that it's part of the cost structure, right? It might be that it's not as effective or not as cost effective as the raw material in its virgin form, but we could use this as well. Definitely, it should be part of that, 100%. Okay, so let's go on to, I think, the last section here. It's just looking at measuring and quantifying supply chain performance scenarios. So really quickly on this one, I've just really blasted a bunch of metrics onto a page, right? So this is just metrics on a page. There you go. These are some examples of metrics. But I've really thought about this from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So more quantitative metrics, things like order fulfillment cycle time, forecast accuracy, supply chain costs, inventory days of supply, OTIF, on time in full. Those are kind of more hard metrics, right, that are easy to measure if you have the right data, but there's a calculation. The calculation is very clear. Then you get metrics or performance that is more around more softer things, or more qualitative, like the level of skill of people, supply chain maturity level, the voice of the customer or the voice of the supplier, what is important for customer, important for supplier, and then the customer satisfaction levels as well. Risk level, I actually put right in the middle, because you define risk by looking at the impact of that risk event happening, times by the probability of it happening. So it sounds quantitative, but actually what you're doing is making very broad assumptions on that because of the fact that it hasn't happened yet. So really you're putting a lot of assumptions in that, which is slightly more on the qualitative side. So that's why I put this here in the middle. So the last thing that I want to put here at the end is just thinking about the 2B operating models. So when deciding or making a decision on how we should operate that future supply chain, a way to do it is, and in this example, you can see there's a practice that's been implemented, like starting to use sales and operations planning, or using extending inventory collaboration, inventory planning using collaboration, or CPFR. These are from the SCORE model. But what the process is here is that when we want to implement a new operating model, what we want to actually do before even implementing that is do a test or do a scenario to see what the impact of that would potentially be. So it's about developing the right tests and putting those in place, conducting the tests, and then seeing what the impact of those are. So let's use the collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment one over here. So this is something that is going to form part of the operating model of the organization. What they did as a test is do a walkthrough of the scenario led by a consultant. They passed that, and they realized that CPFR addresses the delayed or missing promotion and demand change data and plan buy-in for that organization. So it helped them to say, yes, something that we think we should put in place. There were other parts of it when they looked at these and said, oh, these didn't really work, which means maybe the test wasn't thorough enough. Maybe we need to look at the test, or it really did fail and it's not something that they want to do maybe now, but we can add it to a wish list, right, for later. Doing this is going to help us determine really where the impact is. And I really just want to leave this last piece at the bottom over here, is looking at this metric baseline. So where are we right now from a metric perspective? what is the target, and what would the change be with that anticipated operating model. So those are the key things that I think we want to end this with. I have one more slide, and just to share this with you, because Symbios-Consulting is also offering the CTSC, which is the Certified in Supply Chain Transformation certification. It's a brand new certification that we have as ASCM. And I'll ask Shireen or one of the team to tell us the date of when the first class is going to be. But we have CPIM, CSCP, and CLTE currently. We've now added the CTSC onto our list too. And this is a really great way to think about and understand strategic elements of the supply chain and how to make a transformation in that supply chain. So to really take it from one level of performance to another through different steps, different models, and really different frameworks using within this. So I'm actually myself doing the CTSC right now, and I'll hopefully be writing the exam soon. And I think Shireen wrote the exam has written the exam, but has not got the results yet. So you'll see how.
Yes, I have been in the committee who designed the body of knowledge for CTSC.
Absolutely. How could I forget that, Shireen?
So that's okay. It's okay.
Not
So
only,
I think
not
it's
only, not only have you written the exam, but you've also done it.
Yes,
Yeah.
please go on.
No, I was just saying, not only have you written the exam, but you're also involved in the content itself, which is fantastic.
Yes, I think it's a very important certification for anyone who will be managing a company, not just managing supply chain, because it gets the technology piece, strategy piece, process harmonization piece, the value chain model, supply chain model, best practices, how you engage with your customers and suppliers. So it's a fantastic program, and we plan to have it right maybe in May and April after Ramadan. Okay.
Excellent. Amazing. Yeah, so that's a really great course to think about for anyone in the audience that's watching this and wants to be involved in the transformation effort.
Yes. And anyone
really,
is interested, please write your email, and we're happy to connect with you, because now target operating model, supply chain operating model is an essential part for every company, because we have great strategies, and we need our strategies to be agile, to be adaptive, and no way to do it with the old way. You need to have the right target operating model, which is incorporated with your supply chain processes and technology. So of course, It would be great. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shireen and team. So Sumit, to quickly, I think, answer your question, I think that, it's related to IBP and integrated business planning. So IBP is really a more advanced version of S&OP. And as we move through the levels of maturity into IBP, we're really thinking of that level 4 and level 5, right, that you saw right in the beginning, from a maturity level perspective. So as a supply chain specialist, IBP is very related to how we translate activities in the supply chain into financial terms and the impact of that on financials. So if you're involved in the planning function of in any way, in forecasting, etc., this is really where you can contribute as a supply chain professional to your organization's journey onto IBP. Right. So happy to take that offline, if you have more questions related to IBP, Sumit. But I think that would be my statement for now. All right. Well, I think we might have come up with time now. Thank you very much, everyone, for the time today. And thank you so much to Symbios-Consulting, as always. Really one of our...
Thank you for making this amazing presentation, and this in such a short time. It would take people a long time to absorb all of this. This is impressive. Thank you.
You're most welcome, and thank you so much as well to everybody here. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined us and spent part of their weekend with us. Thank you. Okay.